everyone, journalists, friends, partners, and such. I'd like to welcome you to the Shoko International Spoken Word and Hip Hop Festival Conference. My name is Outspoken. I'm the production manager and marketing manager of the festival, and I will let the comrades introduce themselves.
The name is Comrade Fatso, aka Sam Fry Monroe. I am the festival director at Shoko.
Hired Gun, Kali. I'm a hip hop MC, artist educator, New York.
Akala, hip hop artist, educator, MC. I like the way Akala rounded that up, so I'll take that. Founder of the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company, London.
So the way the conference is going to go is we're going to hear briefly what the festival is about and what these fine gentlemen are about, and then questions will open to the public.
Yes, right. So I'm going to start off just giving you guys an idea of what the festival is about. I think all of you got programs there on your chairs, which will give you a full idea. We've got the bios of the artists, the program, etc., etc. But the idea behind Shoko, of course, is the first time we're holding it this year, but we aim to make it an annual festival. And the idea is for it to be a celebration of spoken word, hip hop, and urban culture. But a celebration of poetry, hip hop, and urban culture that is about positive social change, that is socially conscious, that is progressive. Myself and many others have been part of building the spoken word movement in Zimbabwe over the last 10 years, and the role of spoken word, the role of hip hop, has grown more and more in being a positive force for social change, a positive force for freedom of expression. And our thoughts about putting this festival on as Magamba was that there was a necessity to take it to the next level. We've had the House of Hunger Poetry Slam, we've had Mashoko Spoken Word event going on, and as Magamba, there are many events that we have been putting on, getting 200 people coming through, 300 people coming through. But the idea was to put on something like a festival that could be a true celebration of this movement that is here. If you speak to a lot of arts practitioners over the last 10 years, the art form that has grown in Zimbabwe, while many others have suffered, has been poetry and spoken word, which actually the spoken word movement did not really exist here until the early 2000s. And our idea is it not just being about poetry and not just about hip hop, but about all facets of urban culture that are progressive. So that's why you'll see we will have social media, live social media reporting going on, tweeting, blogging about the festival in real time. We'll be having artist debates about the role of arts in social change. We'll be having a conference here. We'll be having workshops and many other things happening from graffiti to DJing.
Good morning, welcome. I really don't know where to start. It's my first time actually in Africa, so I'm very excited to be here. I've actually worked a little bit with Outspoken in the United States. I think we met at Trinity International Hip Hop, actually Fatso and Outspoken a few years ago, 2009. We were talking outside. So, again, I'm just really excited to be here, and, I'm also affiliated with Nomadic Wax, and it's very interesting, and it's very great to see the rise of international hip hop, especially someone coming from the States, from specifically New York City, and watching over the past 10 years how hip hop all across the globe is starting to finally get the recognition that it deserves. So it's really, really exciting. I'm very humbled to actually be here in Africa and actually performing and meeting all these different artists and everything. It's really amazing.
Cool. I mean, this is my first time on the continent. First time in Zimbabwe. I've been to a few other places on the continent, and really been inspired. I came in actually, was it Friday or Saturday?
Friday.
Friday, I got in. Cool. I got in on Friday, and it's really been everything I expected it to be and more. So far, kind of the warmness of the people, the culture here. I went up to Great Zimbabwe over the weekend. I'm not sure how much that has to do with the festival, but it's just really been part of what's kind of coloured and added to the experience kind of the country, and I'm just again, exactly what Ayagon was saying, the kind of rise of hip hop in an international context, which has been massively supported by digital media. Even within the UK, over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, how artists like myself have been able to really get quite a strong following in the UK, been able to tour up and down the country, and really have a commercially successful career as an underground artist has been because of this digital media phenomenon, this connection of an international fan base via these platforms that we have. And I really think that in the 21st century, these are the main tools we have as hip-hop artists, but also as social activists generally. You know, we've got an opportunity to spread an idea around the world at the click of a button, and that's what we're hoping to continue to do. It's a pleasure to be here in this international but African context.
Okay, at this point, we'll open it to the floor if any questions, remarks, any likes, and such others.
So is this the first festival, Shoko Festival International?
Yeah.
How long has this been going?
This is the inaugural festival. We aim to make it annual. But I think literally we've started working on this. Gan was asking me yesterday when we started working on this, and I think we only started really like March, April this year. We had a strategic planning meeting and we said, comrades, we need to have the festival. But next year is too late. So yeah, we basically, I think about March, April, just before Haifa, started putting this together. So I think we've had to work double time to make a festival that should take about 1.5 years happen in the space of just over 6 months. But yeah, we aim to have it happening every year and make it bigger and better every year, and make it a real living space, a real living laboratory of progressive art.
It still blows my mind you guys did this in like 6 months. Yeah. It's kind of interesting too, you know, being from the United States and specifically being in New York, which is the birthplace of hip hop. It's amazing to me, and it's humbling, and in a certain degree, it's almost embarrassing. We don't have anything of this type of caliber. Everything in the United States with hip hop is, on a mainstream level, largely is commercial. Mm-hmm. So to have like a festival that's about social change, hip hop is social change, this is unprecedented. I mean, this is what's so amazing to me, and it's something that I've seen not only just here in Africa, but I've been to South America and Brazil. They have something similar called hip hop camperismo in southern Brazil. Just amazing how the essence and the core of what hip hop is, I see more reflected in the hip hop communities outside of essentially the birthplace, where someone like myself is really kind of a novelty now in hip hop in America. Someone that might be speaking about something that's more conscious or addressing the actual issues of the day, as opposed to just worrying about, you know, how many guns I have none, or how much bling I have none. You know, to come, 10,000 miles, I don't know how many miles it is from America, to continue to see the very roots, essence of what hip hop was about. Thriving, not just here, but thriving, is just amazing. That's blows my mind every time I leave the country and go somewhere and see that kind of just being just cultivated and just growing.
In a sense, I think that's almost natural, and what I mean by that, it's like African American culture particularly has had many different manifestations,
right.
But there's always been a consistent energy, if you like. So what we were seeing in jazz with the elements of freestyle, with the syncopated rhythms, with all of that kind of, essentially was what African Americans were bringing with them. That we saw in the Caribbean, that we're seeing in northeastern Brazil. And so it's almost as if it's just 360.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like the culture's gone on many different journeys. It's evolved in many different ways via many different technologies. But essentially, when we look at what the griots were doing in West Africa, when we look at those kind of poetic traditions, when we look at Yoruba priests, you know, who of the day and still in Brazil now have to memorize thousands of poems, literally memorize. And it's like, so this kind of rhythmic oral poetry has been a very consistent, very present thing in African, in all cultures, but in African Caribbean culture particularly. And so I think it's almost natural that and hopefully in the 21st century, that we'll start to see the kind of necessary dialogues that New York had for a period of time, that LA had for a period of time, it's popping up elsewhere in the world, and hopefully, particularly in Africa, we can see that all over Africa. I don't say Africa as if I don't know that there are millions of countries in Africa. I know that can be often how it's marketed. I mean it in the sense that I don't think you can sell America back to America better than America already does it. Britain tried that for a very long time, it didn't work. And finally, the only reason the UK is starting to get a bit of a voice is because it's not an American voice anymore. No one in England, if you rapped in an American accent now in England, people just look at you like you lost your mind. 15 years ago, that was normal. Everybody did it. And so I feel like all over the continent I've travelled and we're at a stage where that dialogue's being had. But what Zimbabwe can bring to the table, in my opinion, and what Africa generally can bring to the table is that you're African. You can't be American, and you shouldn't be American. You know, African Americans had a particular experience. And here, it's like the musicians from here that have done so well, we were talking about this the other day, you know, have been the people that, the Chuma, you know, the Miriam Makibas, the people that haven't imitated America or Britain. You've got something so unique and so beautiful and so different. That's what you should be adding to hip hop. It's your experience and your flavour, in my opinion.
I got a question for both Akala and Andreattah. When did you fall in love with hip hop?
Oh, wow. 1987, I was 11 years old. I was just actually telling Akala the story. There's a radio station that now plays, I think, like R&B or something. It was 98.7 KISS FM, DJ Red Alert. It was a Friday night, and on my cousin's little boombox in my grandmother's house, was listening to the radio, and a song came on. It was called Self-Destruction. It was actually a song that was created by a collaborative group of artists under the banner called Stop the Violence movement. At the time in the 80s, specifically in a lot of the urban areas, New York, LA, Chicago, all these other places, there was just a rise of violence. So the response by artists were to create this basic conglomerate of individuals. They actually did an entire record, but they were called Stop the Violence movement. And that song is what really got me, just what they were speaking about, the voices. It just seemed larger than life to me. From that song, it's been pretty much my life since then.
For me, I think it's a weird genesis living in London, because I suppose my view of hip hop is skewed differently in the sense that, of course, you've got a lot of the way hip hop was born in the Bronx is a mix of a very long tradition of Latino and African American poetry via the Last Poets and people like that. But then obviously with Kool Herc and African Bambaataa and everyone else coming from the Caribbean, it's like this blend of two different African cultures. In the UK, it was similar in that we had a heavy Jamaican presence in my life, long before really hip hop took over. I mean, from the day I was born, really. And we already had in the UK Jamaican rappers, if you like, in the charts before any American hip hop record was in the charts. So Smiley Culture was #1 in Britain in 1985. Rest in peace, he died recently. But he was in the charts in 1985. So we wouldn't class that as hip hop necessarily because it was a Jamaican accent or a British accent. But it's rhyming, it's sampling, it's looping, it's many of the same elements that went over to New York and were mixed with what was going on there. They also came to England of their own genesis, if that makes sense. But the first hip-hop record that would be defined as hip-hop was probably when I was maybe 5, 6. My stepdad and my real dad were both DJs, and again, it was a weird mix because they were Caribbean sound system DJs, but they were also playing this American hip-hop massively, and there was this dancehall hip-hop constant trade-off. But that was the record for me, the Fear of a Black Planet album, actually. And I learned the words of the entire album when I was maybe literally 6 or 7, because it got played so much. And again, just like I've done, for me, it's been my life ever since, or maybe even before.
Wow. So cool, that's so outspoken. What were the biggest challenges in trying to get this whole festival together?
I'll hand that over to you.
I need a list. Challenges. I don't know. Now that we're at this stage, they've kind of all dissolved. But we will remember them. I mean, we've got notes and stuff. Yeah, but I think the most important thing, which was challenging at first for me, was visualizing it. Because it was also like trying to take something that you're so used to, as in hip-hop, spoken word, and also these actual venues that I was also used to, and reinventing them in a way, and trying to see how it could come to be something that it's not regular to be like, if that makes any sense, and it goes off. But yeah, it was like just envisioning how we could make the transformation, how we could make it interesting to us, to make it interesting to everyone else. Because if you're used to the same thing, it might be like, how's it gonna be? It's just gonna be just people going on stage and going off or whatever. But it was more like, no, let's cultivate it into like the broader culture and just put it in these little labs and see what grows from it. Yeah, so it was, I think, yeah, the vision more than anything.
And I think that's the thing. The vision kind of grew because I think that's how it works. I mean, we formed Magamba together in 2007, nearly 4 years ago. And I think there's just been a gradual progression. We've been involved in the spoken word movement, and I was one of the co-founders of the first poetry slam here. And then our reason for forming Magamba was also trying to take the spoken word and hip-hop movement to another level, and being able to, have a network to put on events, to put on events, spoken word events, and to run projects that were about using poetry, hip-hop, and urban culture for positive social change. And we've been running Mashoko, Zim's leading spoken word and hip-hop event, for the last nearly 4 years. And that's just grown, it's grown, and we've produced, it's helped to give a platform to the kind of the new voices in Zimbabwean spoken word and hip-hop. But then we're kind of like, yeah, from that, we need to build it into something else. And so that's where the festival idea came. And then the challenges around that are diverse. Okay, one is the vision, because it carried on expanding. It was like, okay, we'll have a Friday night festival. Then it became Friday and Saturday night. Then someone threw the conference idea. So we'll have a conference on, then a workshop, then a Thursday, then a Wednesday. Then it became like a 4-day festival. And we're kind of like, okay, so our inaugural festival is going to be a 4-day festival in 4 different venues. And of course, there are the various challenges. I mean, like logistical and fundraising and immigrational. I mean, to put on a festival in this country. Zim is the hardest place in the region to bring an artist into. To put on a festival or to bring an artist into the country, we have dealt with 6 different government agencies. So it's not just like, we can pick up the phone and call Hired Gun or call Akala and say, guys, just jump on the next flight and rock up. You have to deal with National Arts Council, Censorship Board, Immigration, Police. Who else is there that I've left out? The City Council might jump on board. I don't know why. Who else we have to deal with? There's so many we've even forgotten. But there are a lot of kind of logistical challenges that do come up. But I think ultimately, hopefully we did enough planning for this week to flow smoothly enough.
I just wanted to know what you hope the outcomes of the festival will be, apart from everybody having a great time for 3 days. What will the outcomes be?
That's a great donor question. What are the outcomes and the indicators? What is the perceived impact? Follow the same method. I think what we do hope to see is not just having Shoko as an event, but seeing it as part of a process, and hoping that we do have hundreds of people passing through, and especially youth and from diverse backgrounds, from the townships and from the suburbs. On the one hand, participating in the workshops, in the conferences, but we're also aiming to build up more of a database, because for every event we have, we always have contacts lists going out. So the idea is to build up more and more of a database of youth, young artists, young activists who are interested in art for social change in its in its broad sense, so that we can take this movement forward in a much more strategic way, be it in having follow-up workshops and conferences for those who are interested, be it getting those who've come through to be involved in more events, in other festivals, and very importantly, I mean, the things that are difficult with arts, it's much more difficult to measure than other spheres of NGO life. We can't just say 20 people attended a workshop and ate biscuits and we achieved our objectives. The things that are more difficult to measure are always, the hope that having spaces like this that celebrate freedom of expression end up expanding that democratic space, end up expanding spaces of free expression, end up expanding the space for artistic progress in our country, and at the same time, apart from pushing forward those ideals of social justice, hoping that also these kind of spaces give birth to new ideas and to this new generation of artists that we do want to see, artists that aren't cut off from outside influences. I think for us it's really important to create spaces like this where we bring in fantastic, bright, cutting-edge international artists so we can have this cross-pollination happening with local artists. I don't think many of us listen to radio or TV in Zimbabwe much because it's not playing what we want to hear. And a lot of mainstream art for me in Zimbabwe, and mainstream art globally, doesn't say what I want to hear. And I think that's the truth for many people, is that if we're going to hope to promote and produce a new generation of artists that are progressive, that are creative, then we have to create the spaces for that, because radio and TV aren't doing that. I mean, if we want to create a generation of artists that just sings about bling and how many cars they got and how many guns they got and how cool they are and how sexist they are, then I'm sure we could get a load of sponsors on board and do a festival like that. But that's not what we're about. And I think this, creating spaces like these has a lot of immeasurable impacts in the space that it creates, in the vibe that it creates, in what it promotes, and hopefully, how it can lead to a new generation of young artists and of young activists who can take over from where we leave off. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
My first question is for Hired Gun. Where are you based in New York, firstly? And before you became a cutting-edge artist, did you have another occupation? And thirdly, are you for hire?
Okay. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I am in Brooklyn, New York. Let's see. I've worked in a lot of different places. I've always been an MC though. I've been making music since, I think the first time I recorded myself was 12. I had a band at 15. Everything that I was doing outside of my music was just the thing that I was doing. It wasn't what I would consider like my career. So you have to make money in America to live there. New York is really expensive. So unfortunately, especially the hip hop I make doesn't really make much money. But I would say that I've been doing, I started my art education work 2007, so I'm relatively new to it. I come from a family of educators. My father's a teacher. So I was exposed to that at an early age as far as what it meant to be a teacher and an educator. But if you know anything a little, or just to give you a little idea about the education system in the United States, it's very, very corrupt. It's failing, and not because of the teachers, just because of the way the system is structured. And me having an understanding of that, it took me a little while to figure out how could I work with young people, but not in a traditional sense. And I'm fortunate enough to live in a city where there is those types of opportunities. So arts education essentially, I'm not sure about here, but when I was growing up, classical education included math, science, history, geography, but then also arts, music, drama. it was a part of the curriculum. That's just, it wasn't an extra. It was what you had in your education. Since the late 1970s, mid-70s, in New York City, that essentially has become optional. Basically, when New York City became bankrupt, I think in 1974 or 5, they basically cut funding in schools. The first thing that they cut were the arts programs. So arts and music became basically optional. In that vacuum of space, this new sort of entity arose, arts education. And I've been doing that now, I said, for about almost 5 years. I am for hire, just for music. And actually funny, I'm glad you kind of brought it up, because everybody usually asks and they're like, hired gun, you don't look thuggish. You don't look like you're Tumi. The name came about because about 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of different things, all of us. Not only was doing hip hop MC, but I also have a drum and bass crew, Black Ops. I was actually in a dance troupe as well, in addition to freelance writing and throwing my own events. So I literally was for hire. I was just doing a lot of myriad different types of things. So the name basically came about because essentially, if there was something creative that was done, usually I was involved in it in some way, shape, or form. So that's kind of where the name came from. But yes, I do not own, again, I do not own any weapons. I'm not a part of the crew. If that wasn't obvious from my appearance. But yes.
For Akala again and Andreattah, how would you describe your brand of
$1 million question. I don't know if I have a brand of hip hop. I don't know. In the United States, we fight all these labels all the time. Conscious rapper, bling rapper, southern rapper, chop and screw, whatever, hyphy, whatever you want to call it. I've never really been afraid to call myself a conscious artist, whatever that means, but I don't know if I necessarily have a brand, or I have a real definition other than the fact that I do hip-hop music, and I consider myself a part of the hip-hop culture. Maybe I should have a brand. I might make more money that way if I kind of figure out a brand. But yeah, I mean, I just feel like I just do hip-hop music, and that's what I consider it. I will say that, and we'll talk about it a little bit in my talk, what I consider hip-hop might not be what other people consider hip-hop. So when you use that term, we might not be talking about the same things, even if on the surface we might appear, to be the same. You might have DJ, breakbeats, whatever, we're hip-hop, but how you go about it, what you're talking about, the level of skill involved in what you're doing is kind of how I would be defining it. So in that ways, I consider what I do is just hip-hop music. So I could be doing, an artist that might be completely different in terms of their subject matter than me. I would be considering in the same vein, well, just because you may be talking about things that might be relating to, say, violence or a strong subject matter, doesn't mean that I wouldn't consider what you're doing hip-hop. It depends on how you're speaking about it and what it's in what context. So I don't get into kind of like the branding of it's this or that. It's either hip-hop to me or it's not.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Edgar in that, in the sense that I think that we've got to be very careful as hip-hop artists that we don't allow rap to be held as a scapegoat for society's ills. And what I mean by that is, yeah, there is some very negative hip-hop music. Yes, there is some very misogynistic hip-hop music. Yes, there is some very materialistic hip-hop music. But all of that reflects the misogyny, violence, and materialism in our culture, full stop. It's not specific to rap. And we have to be clear about that. When a computer games company sells 200-300 million units of Call of Duty or of Grand Theft Auto, they're not blamed for the violence in the world, but 50 Cent raps a bit too violently, he is responsible. We have to ask ourselves why that is. And I think it's important that we don't, like I said with the title Conscious MC, it's been a complex title, because I don't think that because somebody raps about violence, what they're doing is not valid. Biggie Smalls is one of the greatest MCs ever, indisputably. But his music might be violent and negative, but he's like the Quentin Tarantino of hip-hop. And there's a space for that. I don't think that should be excluded because some of it's ugly. Some of life is ugly. I think the problem comes when we don't have balance. Growing up in the 90s, I think what was so beautiful is that I had Biggie and Snoop, but I also had Tribe Called Quest and Mos Def and Wu-Tang and Talib Kweli. I had a rounded picture of what the neighborhoods from which hip-hop was coming from was. Without Mobb Deep, most def doesn't make any sense. But together they make sense. And so I think what we need is balance, not dishonesty. If someone's from a particular lifestyle, has been through particular things, there's no reason they shouldn't speak about that. And it doesn't make what I do more valid than what they do. Because in fact, if you listen to a lot of my earlier music, it's very different from the music I make today, because my living environment was very different, because what I was around was very different, because my mentality was very different. I think what can happen with rappers is that they think that if they leave a particular environment, that they have to still pretend they're in that environment, or they have to still pretend that they're 19 and they're angry and they have the same mentality. It's like rappers are not allowed to grow. And I think that's very dangerous. And so I would define what I do as hip-hop music, but again, I would define hip-hop within the context of poetic oral traditions. I think when you divorce, there can be a tendency, and this is even some of us who love hip-hop, there can be a tendency, if we don't have knowledge of what came before it, for us to almost be historically cheated in the way that hip-hop's defined. There's been loads of documentaries done in Britain, probably in America too, where it's like, oh, in the 1970s, you know, a man from Jamaica with dreadlocks carried 5 speakers to the Bronx, and then all of a sudden this unprecedented thing that happened. No one's got any idea how it happened, because the people who did it didn't have any culture before it happened.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
Right.
So without jazz, without blues, without gospel, and then without what Africans brought from Africa with them, hip-hop doesn't mean anything. You know, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. You know, and we wouldn't be stupid enough to define Beethoven without looking at what came from it. You know, without Bach, without the centuries, without even the influence of the Moors, with the influence of Hindu music. You know, culture happens within a historical context. And I think we have to be very careful with hip-hop, because I've seen a billion documentaries where that happens. You know, where it's like 1974, Gil Scott-Heron's not even in it. I mean, how you can do a documentary about the evolution of hip-hop culture without the last poets and Gil Scott-Heron is beyond me, but it happened. So my definition of hip-hop would also, as an MC, obviously you've got the other elements, but the MC element, for me, has to be defined within a context of poetic, rhythmical, oral traditions.
It's all about the narratives. I mean, you know, what is being spoken about, how it's being spoken about, the context, and I think that's the biggest thing that gets lost in what Carlos said is very, very true. It's like when you look at what's going on in the music, or any music, you know, rock and roll has been as misogynist, as violent as any music on the planet. If you actually listen to a lot of even jazz, there's those elements in it, the drug culture within jazz. You hear it in the music, but it doesn't get demonized in the same way. And in growing up in the United States, the sense that I always had was because, unlike a lot of other musics and a lot of other forms, cultures, hip-hop had a way of activating young people. It had a way of making you start to look at the world in a different way. It had a way of putting your place in relation to the world in a different way. So now you were looking at yourself not through, say, the lens of someone who was, you know, on a higher class or from a different race. You were looking at it through your own lens. You were looking at it through your own history. You were looking at it through your own environment, because now you actually have someone speaking about it. So you have someone like Biggie who, someone will look at the narrative and go, oh, he's just a, you know, gangster thug from Bed-Stuy. But when you realize he's talking about the very conditions that existed in Bed-Stuy and how to live in those conditions and how to survive and thrive in those conditions. And this is some of the stuff that we talk about in the organization that I work at, kind of dealing with that narrative. You begin to realize, well, if you're really listening to Biggie, what you're listening to is someone breaking down, this is what's going on in Brooklyn in 1990, so and so forth, instead of taking his, and I won't say literal, but I won't, because a lot of the stuff that Biggie was talking about was actually biographical, but you know, the idea of like, oh, he's just talking about guns, he's just talking about violence. Like, no. He's explaining a condition, he's explaining an environment, he's giving you a picture into something that you wouldn't even know existed, similar to someone like Ice Cube or NWA in the early 90s. No one really cared about Compton until NWA came out and starts talking about it, and people, oh, they're glorifying gangs. No. They're explaining to you why these things exist. If you're listening to the songs, they're explaining police brutality. They're explaining why these environments exist, and it has nothing to do necessarily with the individuals that are in the environment or being affected by those. But that's not the narrative that you get to hear. So someone like, going back to you talking about the brands, someone who doesn't really understand history might not look at it and say, Ice Cube is a conscious rapper. If you listen to American Most Wanted, it's clearly a conscious rapper, even though it's highly violent. But again, that's why it's difficult to kind of like put one person in this box and another person in that box, or I'm branding this, or branding that.
I mean, what are human beings, you know? You're probably a lovely guy. I'm sure if someone broke into your house and tried to beat up your sister, you'd become a very unlovely guy. You know, it's like, people don't have fixed identities, you know? Experience changes you. And I think what you were saying about Shakespeare, you know? Plays are violent, man. Titus Andronicus, you know, in that play, one man needs to get revenge on someone else, so he cuts this guy to pieces, puts him in a pie, and feeds it to the guy's parents. You know, if a rapper said that, you'd be like, oh my god,
Right.
how disgraceful.
Right.
You're real bad this right now. Sociopath. Right. But Shakespeare's speaking about a time in Britain where it was perfectly normal, you know, for the king to chop off his wife's head if she got on his nerves. I mean, we think about it now, and we look back and laugh about it, and it becomes tremendously sanitized. But this is a time in England where it was ghetto, real ghetto, even in the royal family, where men are chopping each other up. So it's like, put Shakespeare's in Incredible Arts, Biggie's in Incredible Arts. My issue with rap is when it becomes lame. That's the main thing for me. When a guy, whether he's conscious, so-called, or negative, if he's crap with words, I'm not interested. It's boring. I don't. That's my biggest issue. Is balance and is what people are doing. But my last point I wanted to make, which I didn't make, about the evolution of the rhythmic speech, really, of hip-hop, of rapping. Again, we have to understand that when Africans went to America and to the Caribbean, and to Brazil, South America, so it's like in Jamaica, for example, I'll give you the Jamaican example because it's one I know well. You have 20 different African linguistic groups in Jamaica, all of whom have different words, but different rhythmic tonalities in Jamaica. So what you think of as the Jamaican patois accent is not just Jamaicans failing to speak English properly. It's Africanized English. It reflects the rhythmic tonalities and syntax, and even the structures of tenses in Jamaican patois are the structures of tenses in the West African linguistic groups. We still even have some of the words, like the word picnic. You know, it's not an English word. We say picnic means child. Well, it's a word in Sierra Leone. And there's various other words and tonalities in Jamaica that are, and that's why I suppose the Jamaican accent really lent itself so early to rapping. You know, because West African speech, if you know, European speech is structured on the iambic pentameter, the twos. 1, 2, di-dum, 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 di-dum. West African speech is on the threes. I can't do it as well as my friend did it in the documentary we just did recently. But it's very rhythmical speech. And that continues through jazz. So in early jazz music, you know, you have scatting. You can go on YouTube and watch Ella Fitzgerald, you know, doing these sounds. No one wants to explain why. But when you understand her as a person whose original language is lost, who's trying to find a new language, when she's going doing all these sounds, and then you listen to a West African talking really fast, you know, it becomes obvious. And when you understand rap in that evolution, there is even more no reason why people living on this continent should be imitating people over there, because what they have evolved out of, many other influences, absolutely, but evolved out of what they took from here. And when you understand that history, it's really obvious. But hip-hop's never presented in that way, because the people who own hip-hop are not the people who create it. I mean, even the word hip-hop, hippie, comes from a Wolof, West African word, which means to open one's eyes and see. It's a term of enlightenment. So right there in the name tells you something about the origin of it. Africa Bambaataa told you that, KRS-One told you that. But they're not the faces of hip-hop anymore. If they were, you'd be hearing it much more like how we're telling it to you than MTV trying to sell you Coca-Cola or Gucci.
I just wanted to know what part does Shakespeare play in your performance? How big a role?
So yeah, there's kind of two entities. There's Akala the artist, and I make my own music, and I've released 3 albums in the UK, and they're inspired by whatever I choose for them to be inspired by. The last one was actually inspired. Last album was called Doublethink, and that was actually taken from Orwell's 1984. I was looking at the political conditions in Britain and the world today through the lens of that book. But with the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company, which is an educational entity, a music theatre production entity we have, we essentially retell, reinterpret, change the works of Shakespeare at whim and at will. It's very much not about doing Shakespearean youth speak for all the unintelligent, you know, working class kids. It's very much about Shakespeare's defined even in Britain as this, wow, Shakespeare, he's so clever, I can't possibly understand him, it's just too difficult. He's defined in this way, when in reality he was the people's poet of his day. He didn't speak what we call posh English, because that wasn't invented until 150 years after he died. So, I mean, he managed to entertain the Queen and the poorest people at the time. 90% of his audience was illiterate. So the idea that he's become too difficult is just remarkable. So we really take Shakespeare apart, look at the stories, look at the themes, look at the scenes and quotes. So we might do something as directors. We did a young people's production of Othello at the Lowry Theatre in the UK with 50 young people from Manchester. Or we might do something where they've just taken a particular line like the beast with two backs from Othello, or devil in a bottle, or one of these phrases, and people write songs inspired by that. So, to be honest, we use Shakespeare and hip hop. You know, we use Nazi's work, we might use Wu-Tang's work, we might use KRS-One or Saul Williams. You know, we might use these incredible hip hop poets as a jump-off point. So it might be either one within the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company that people use as inspiration for their work, because that's what artists do. I mean, that's what Shakespeare was doing. Many of those stories are not his stories. Hamlet isn't his original story. It's a story. It's a Danish story that Shakespeare reinterpreted. And so we're trying to continue that legacy. But the level to which it's constricted by Shakespeare is wholly dependent on the particular project we're doing. Does that make sense?
We'll be taking our last two questions. There are two questions.
How many, in terms of Zimbabwe, how many people do you feel will come with that attitude to the festival, where they're looking for that transformation, where they're looking to be open to new artists coming from outside, and, you know, as the question was asked, you know, what are you looking for the outcome of the festival? In Zimbabwe, do you feel that there's that consciousness of what hip-hop really is about, and how it can actually help move things forward? And, yeah.
Well, I can speak personally, but I always like going and doing something without thinking too much, like saying what kind of market is it gonna be accepted by the market or whatever. Rather create a space, create that market, just make something available for people, and whoever's gonna gravitate towards it can gravitate towards it. But just give them the opportunity to see that another point of view exists rather than what they're exposed to. Because sometimes it's like brain busting, trying to explain to someone what hip hop is or where it comes from and stuff. Like no, you're talking about Black and Yellow, Wiz Khalifa and stuff, you know. So what they're exposed to is fighting what you're trying to say to them. So rather just expose them to something else. If they accept it, then yeah, it grows and moves on from there. But if they don't, you know, but you just do your thing, just keep on doing what you're doing, regardless of how society is going to take it.
So I think that's the thing. It's about creating those spaces. I mean, we wouldn't have known that the spoken word or hip hop had that kind of following in Zim if we hadn't started with slam or if we hadn't started Mashoko. And I think that is the thing in Zim is like a lot of space is lacking. And it's about creating that space. And I know, you know, there's definitely a crowd for conscious hip hop. There's definitely a crowd for spoken word. There are definitely those that are interested in social media. There are definitely those that are interested in film. There are those interested in graffitiing. There are those interested in b-boying. There are those who will just be interested in the bar. That's normal. It's a festival. There are those interested in urban design and will be hanging out there by the clothes stores. So I think it's also about uniting different aspects of urban culture, and those who are interested in arts. And at the same time, you know, you'll have young activists coming along interested in new forms that activism can take. Because I studied English, French, and politics at university, and have been involved in political activism. But traditional political activism is very boring. I mean, artistic. I think when arts and culture is used, it's more organic. It's people can relate to it much more, and it's more fun to do. You know what I mean? I'd much rather go to a concert than go to a political rally. I'd much rather go to a gig than go to a workshop. You know what I mean? It's like I think it's also about exposing, as Art was saying, exposing people to that and creating the space to let it thrive. Yeah.
But you would go to a workshop. That's our workshop, right?
Yeah, it's your workshop. I'm interested in boarding into your workshop.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I don't know if anybody else has a question, because I've already asked one.
okay. No, it's the only hand up.
But no, well, it's not really a question, it's just an observation. It's a fantastic panel, but I don't see any women up there.
Yes, that's true.
And in all
That's their fault.
In all of the artists that you're mentioning and referencing, there's also not a lot of women mentioned there. And I just wondered what you can tell me about that.
Definitely. No, this it is a key thing. One of our headline acts, Andreattah Chuma, is a woman. She's a poet from Botswana. She's the headline act on Friday alongside Akala. And also, actually, for the festival, we had aimed to bring in Shalji Patel, an amazing woman poet, female poet from Kenya. We'd also approached Lebo Mashire from South Africa. They both had scheduling conflicts. But I mean, it is something that we do see. I mean, a key role for us to play is to encourage the participation of young women in spoken word and hip hop. We make sure that every event we have, we will always have representation of of a young female poet or spoken word or hip hop artist, and this will be true at the festival. At the events that we're throwing, Andreattah wouldn't have been on this panel, but she only arrives on Friday. But there've been very deliberate attempts for the main concerts that are happening for the inclusion of some of Zim's upcoming and some of Zim's best hip hop artists and spoken word artists that are women. The poetry slam that we're doing on Thursday is also quite balanced. We've got a female poet from Kenya, female poet from Botswana, female poet from South Africa, female poet from Germany. So there is definitely an aim always to try and keep it balanced, to encourage more young women to get involved in spoken word and hip hop, because there are definitely very few. And funnily enough, there are less young women involved in hip hop and Zim than there are in spoken word. It's easier for us to get young spoken word artists on board than they are to get young women hip hop artists on board. And this is, it's also, I think, to do with how the culture is viewed here. When we started the spoken word movement, there weren't preconceptions about it. It was quite open, and we had a lot of young women and young men participating. Whereas hip hop is still seen, as quite male dominated, and that may be a reason that young women tend not to participate in it much. But we hope the likes of Andreattah giving talks and workshops, with Lena giving talks and workshops, of getting more young women involved. Definitely.
The funny thing I wanted to add on to that, what you were saying, the funny thing about hip hop becoming the poster child for misogyny in the Western world is that, ironically, one of the things that hip hop was doing when it came out in the late 80s, and if you look at many of the big rappers from, say, 87 to 96, there was much more female representation in hip hop during that period than there was in, say, guitar music. I can't think of any wholly female guitar bands that are among the big groups, but when you look at you look at Sister Soldier, you look at Lauryn Hill, you look at Queen Latifah, MC Light, you look at Salt and Pepper. They weren't, I'm not saying there was no sexism, let me be clear, but they were accepted by anyone who knows anything about hip hop as great MCs. The fact that they were women, you try and get most men to go on the stage with Lauryn Hill and rap, it's not going to happen, So it's very interesting what the perception of hip hop's become, even in the UK. My sister was one of the biggest, was in garage MCs, and there was a lot of sexism in it at the time, but she proved her skill, and I was like, oh, all right, cool. And she became one of the biggest MCs before she started singing and all that. So actually, this culture has always tried, in my opinion, when it's the culture, not the corporate, not the commerciality of it, but the culture has, women have been a very, very strong force. I wouldn't even say it's because of men, because it's not. Women have been a very strong force in demanding representation in hip-hop culture, and I hope that continues, but I think that there needs to be, in places where they were not exposed perhaps so much to that generation of hip-hop, which is the case even for young people in the UK today, that period almost needs to be revisited to show young women, look, you can, do this. This has happened before, and you have been respected in this. And many of maybe your favourite singers came out of this, Mary J. Blige, a hip-hop soul singer. She came very much out of hip-hop vernacular, and actually, or Aaliyah. That whole dress code Aaliyah came with was what? That was a female, B-girl, hip-hop inspired dress code. And so I think that needs, it's really about understanding historical context as well. Women have been a massive part of this art.
Yeah, I also would add to that too, unfortunately, and I feel like as similar to how I feel, race is not going to get eliminated if it's just black people speaking about race. Other races have to be speaking about as well. Just that, to discrimination against people that are LGBT, homosexual, or transgender. It can't just be that community speaking about it. It has to be others as well. There's actually a lot of really amazing hip-hop artists, even today. I think of people like Jean Grey. There's a few. But the issue is that we have to, I think as men, do a better job of being like, okay, look, check these MCs out. I mean, there's a term that's kind of thrown around in the culture a lot. Real recognizes real, or skill recognizes skill. And you know what Akala said is very true. It's like it didn't matter if you were male or female, if you were nice on the mic, if you were nice on the turntables, if you could get down and break, that's what it was, and that's what it is. But as these kind of other interests have kind of permeated the culture and kind of separated, now it's like, oh, well, if you're a woman, then you have to be Nicki Minaj. And if you're not Nicki Minaj, then you're going to be ignored. Even though there's an amazing MC, Invincible from Detroit, one of the sickest MCs on the planet, bar none, had nothing to do with anything. But you'll never hear about Invincible because Invincible doesn't use her gender as a selling point for sexuality. So because of that, she's going to get ignored. And I think as a culture as a whole, both men and women, it's kind of hard to like, yo, you need to take a look at these individuals because they're talented and they're skilled and they're doing it. So,
At this particular juncture, I'd like to thank you all for coming through. There should be snacks.
yeah, your dude was already out.
Yeah?
Yeah, he was a while ago.
Okay, yeah. Snacks out. Yeah, and they hit it up. You can't do it without freestyle. Freestyle.
That's surprising.
That's to the MCs.
Oh, get out of here, man. This dude fronts. You front, baby. Get out of here.
Marketing and production, my friend.
Let me tell you something. The first time I met this man in 2009, outside of Trinity College, this dude blew my mind away. I'm not, if we freestyle, you're getting it up. I'm sorry. You're not the program manager.
So we'll leave them to do a closing freestyle.
Wow, wonderful.
Got a beatbox?
Yeah, you need a beatboxer.
No beatboxes, we are just journalists and partners.
Clip to.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll see some point about. Come to the workshop. Come to the workshop.
Yeah, exactly.
Performances, ciphers, live ciphers on site.
Yes.
Thank God I had that one.
Nice one. That'll be time.
Oh,
Cool. Should we?
okay. And